Thanks for attending the 10th Annual New Hampshire Film Festival. One of the greatest aspects of the festival is our panel discussions. And so we're very pleased to welcome these panelists in front of us for a conversation about trends in digital cinematography.
I think if I were to change my profession right now, it would be a bracket manufacturer. For the next, I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I think those guys are the ones that are going to be raking in the money over the next several years, is people who have the ability to make the form factors on the different cameras work with all the equipment that has been in use for 10 or 20 years. It's the shapes are changing so often. The red that's caught up to most of the legacy equipment that's out there, but the SLRs.
What's caught up? Do you mean the availability of accessories?
Yeah, the accessories. When in the first 6 or 8 months that I was getting calls about the red, it was a frightening thing almost to show up on set not knowing what was available, and I was still educating myself as to what was available and what was necessary to work with my Steadicam. But it seems to be okay now. I think everybody has kind of gotten to a point where we understand what's necessary. You know, if you want to mount a certain lens on the camera, you need certain brackets. A lot of the camera assistants are familiar now with what a Steadicam operator might need. So they're not just throwing you a heap of brackets and cables and saying, here, make this work anymore. But the SLR cameras are now a totally different game, where they're almost too small, and I think they're actually cameras in general are going to keep getting smaller. But there are some things that I don't think are ever going to change, as in the size of a camera's footprint. I think you're just dealing with laws of physics there, where it needs to be a certain size in order to have a stable footing on whatever it's mounted upon. And I think they're just too small now. They only have one little screw, and I don't know what the square inch.
How do you deal with that? Do you weight it?
I've done a number of things. Usually it involves some rod system like this, where you just kind of build around the camera and make it bigger. I've resorted to even putting rubber bands around from the lens to the rods to kind of give it another point of stability, so that there's not any of this rocking that often happens. One of the biggest things that we deal with for every camera that we're given is follow focus, and we have to mount the motors to the lenses that turn the focus. And when you do that, you put a little bit of torque on the lens, and if the camera hasn't got a good footing, it's going to rock up and down, and you're going to see that in the lens, which is unacceptable. Yeah, rubber bands or...
And on that note, it must be tough for the focus puller, given if you're actually not on a cinema lens. Cinema lenses are built differently than your typical still lens, and they have a longer throw for the focus. Focus is given by distance, and what Afton was talking about was as things move further, closer and further away to the lens, you have to focus the lens. A still lens might move this much between absolute near focus, or maybe this much between infinity and near focus, and a cinema lens might go 2 times around even. So do you find that's an issue?
Yeah, and it depends on the lens. Again, a lot of the stock lenses that come with the SLR cameras don't, Gender, you might know better about this, or why they do this, or which ones specifically do this, don't hold their marks.
They don't have hard stops is
Right.
the reason at the end of their range. They don't, when they get to the end, when they get to infinity, they don't physically stop. And when they get back to their minimum focus, they don't physically stop. So if you're making focus marks and you're marking your lens that this is at 5 feet and this is at 7 feet, or this is the actor's 1 mark and this is the actor's 2 mark, and you have marked your lens, and then you spin your lens too far and you go past the infinity, or you go past the minimum and it didn't stop, now the rotation has been moved in relation to the actual mechanism that's turning inside the lens, and you just lost your marks, and you got to stop production and remark your actors. And it's actually a big deal, because people throw these cameras at you and say, we're using this because we heard it's great, and then we as the users have to cope with those decisions. And if we have to stop the production to get focus marks, we can't explain to the producer for 90 seconds that that's because you made us use these lenses that have X, Y technical limitations, whatever. It's like, no, that's our problem. We have to absorb that responsibility and make sure that doesn't happen. So
there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for going on right now, where what we hear from a lot of people is, I wish for a large imager. I wish for it to therefore be shallow depth of field. And I wish for it to be very little money. And the manufacturers respond to this, I call it the Walmart model, where, we could either go into business and make a certain level of camera for a selected group of people for a specific reason, or we could go after similar types that have a budget that's a fraction of that and do it in quantity. So you get 10 of one instead of 1 of another. And what you always have to balance out is, what are the things that you do not get when you get that trade-off? And so I find a little bit with the digital SLR market that we have this notion of, if I will it hard enough, it will just somehow work. So the lens that I throw at it, the lens that I throw at this group of people, they'll figure out how to get it to work, and if they do, then I've saved my money and I've gotten what I want out the other end. And that's a hard compromise for a lot of people, and the reason why certain technologies and tools exist that are not new. I mean, some of it, we're kind of not following history as much as we should. What was done 60, 70 years ago to get, control and machining and everything else to actually do a fine job, we've kind of disregarded some of that, and we've said, you know what, it doesn't really matter. I can get a little plastic screw and a doohickey, and to your point about these bracket manufacturers, that's going to be a temporary thing in my opinion, only because if manufacturers then say, okay, I see what's not in the world right now. If they see a business opportunity, they're going to go after it, which is why I think we'll talk about future technologies a little later. We're starting to see from some of the more traditional video players such as Panasonic and Sony what they're describing as 35mm video cameras or 4/3 video cameras, which will have a PL mount or a Canon mount, but will also have all the monitoring and the audio capability, all of the things that the current digital SLR still cameras that were repurposed for video don't have. So we always kind of see those things where something takes off, everybody else will follow that, and they'll hopefully try to make improvements, and then it may stabilize. So we're in a pendulum system.